The black maid asked the Mafia boss to stand with her briefly, and his agreement sparked a dangerous rumor. Sophia Davis stood in the lavish ballroom, feeling the weight of every sneering glance thrown her way. As a black maid in a high society event, she was used to being invisible, just another face among the staff, tasked with making sure everything ran smoothly. But tonight was different. The whispers were louder, the stares more judgmental. She had always felt the sting of being looked down upon, but tonight, it felt like she was suffocating. As she carried the tray of drinks across the room, her heart pounded in her chest. The guests were laughing, talking, and acting as though she didn't exist. That was until the first harsh comment was made. "Look at her. I bet she doesn't even know how to hold a glass properly," one of the guests snickered. Sophia's face flushed with humiliation, but she kept her head down and focused on her task. "She's nothing more than a servant," another voice joined in. The words felt like daggers. She was used to being treated as invisible, but the open mockery made her want to disappear. Just when she thought she couldn't endure another second, Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss everyone feared, entered the room. His presence was commanding, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his dark eyes scanning the room with lethal precision. He wasn't just any powerful man. He was the kind of person who could make or break people with a single word. And yet, his eyes met hers across the room. For a split second, the world seemed to stop. Her heart skipped a beat as he locked eyes with her. She quickly looked away, certain that she had misread the situation. But then, he made his way toward her. The murmurs of the crowd hushed as Vincent approached. Sophia stood frozen, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to react. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment, there was silence. "You," Vincent said, his voice calm yet filled with authority. "Stand with me, for just a moment." His words were direct, but there was something in them that made her feel seen. Sophia hesitated, her heart racing. Did he just say stand with him? But before she could even respond, he turned slightly, offering her his arm. The room seemed to hold its breath. Without thinking, Sophia reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the world had shifted. A dangerous rumor began to spread almost instantly. Whispers of the Mafia boss standing with the maid, a black woman, spread through the crowd like wildfire. The very idea of someone like Vincent Romano, a powerful and feared man, aligning himself with someone like her, someone so far beneath him in status, sent shockwaves through the room. The guests exchanged glances, their minds racing with questions. What had just happened? Why had he done that? Was there something more to this than met the eye? And just like that, Sophia's life was changed. Little did she know, this brief moment of standing with the Mafia boss would spark a series of events that none of them could have predicted. A dangerous rumor was born, and the world would never look at her, or Vincent, quite the same way again. I'm not sure what happened next, but everything changed that night. Sophia Davis had never thought she would be noticed, let alone be the subject of gossip in a room full of high-profile guests. But the moment Vincent Romano, the notorious Mafia boss, made that small but monumental gesture of standing with her, she felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just the silence that followed his action or the eyes that watched them. It was the realization that she, the maid, the invisible worker in the background, had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. As the crowd began to murmur, Vincent turned to her with that cold, calculating gaze that made most people shrink. But for Sophia, it was different. There was a moment of quiet understanding between them, one that she couldn't explain. He wasn't looking at her as a servant, as society had always done. He wasn't mocking her, belittling her. He simply looked at her as a person. His words broke the silence. "You're okay," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "Don't let them get to you." Sophia wasn't sure why those words hit her like they did. Perhaps it was the unexpected kindness in his tone, or perhaps it was because no one had ever said something like that to her in her entire life. In that instant, she felt a wave of emotion, relief, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She wanted to say something, to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had always kept her head down, always believed that her place in the world was to be invisible. Yet here she was, standing next to one of the most powerful men in the room. and it was as if the world had suddenly opened up to her in a way she could never have imagined. The whispers around them grew louder. Did you see that? The Mafia boss, standing with her. What does it mean? What's going on? Sophia could hear their questions, but she didn't care. It wasn't about them. It was about the strange feeling growing inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced before, hope. But even as she clung to that hope, she knew the danger it brought. The Mafia was not a world for hope. It was a world of power, fear, and ruthless decisions. And yet, something told her that Vincent Romano, for all his power and cold demeanor, was different from the others. As the night went on, the tension in the room shifted. The guests were no longer just looking at her. They were looking at Vincent too, and their gazes were no longer filled with mockery. There was a new sense of curiosity in the air, a realization that maybe this maid was more than just a servant. Maybe she was something more, something that Vincent Romano, of all people, had noticed. But that's when it started. The rumor began to spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into conversations, and conversations turned into speculation. Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss, had stood with her. People began to ask why, and with that question, a dangerous rumor began to form. It wasn't just a rumor about Sophia. It was a rumor about Vincent too, his actions, his motivations, and the power dynamics that shifted the moment he stood with a maid. And rumors, especially those involving someone as powerful as Vincent, were never harmless. They were dangerous. They were volatile. Sophia could feel the weight of the eyes on her as the night wore on. Every glance felt like a question, every conversation behind her back a threat. She knew that once a rumor like this took root, it would change everything. For her, for Vincent, the world around them would never be the same. But what could she do? She wasn't the one who had started it. She wasn't the one who had made the choice. Or maybe, just maybe, she had been the one to ask. She had asked him to stand with her. And he had. And now, everything was different. The rest of the night blurred together as Sophia tried to navigate the undercurrent of gossip and scrutiny. She stayed close to the walls, kept her distance from the guests, and focused on her duties. But in her mind, the whispers were deafening. She couldn't stop thinking about Vincent's gesture. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, like she wasn't just a maid, but a person worthy of his attention. She didn't know what to make of it. Was it kindness? Or was it something else? As the event came to a close, Vincent left the room with his usual entourage of bodyguards, his presence still looming over everything. Sophia didn't see him leave, but she could feel his departure like an absence in the air. She felt the shift. The balance had changed, but she didn't know yet how much that shift would affect her. She didn't know yet how much her life would be altered by the simple act of standing with the Mafia boss for just a moment. I woke up the next morning with the same weight on my chest that I had felt all night long. The silence was louder than the noise of the crowd at the gala, heavier than the whispered rumors. Sophia Davis had spent her entire life learning to be invisible, to fade into the background and accept the way people saw her. But now, after that one moment with Vincent Romano, everything had changed. She could feel it in her bones. As she went about her morning chores in the mansion, her mind kept returning to the night before. She had barely been able to sleep. The events of the evening replayed in her head over and over. The way the guests looked at her, the way Vincent had stood with her in front of them. It was as if the world had shifted beneath her feet, and she was struggling to find her footing again. Sophia moved silently through the halls, dusting the ornate furniture and carefully avoiding the eyes of the other staff members. They had noticed too. They had seen what happened. She could feel their glances, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. But it wasn't the staff that was bothering her. It was the guests, the people who mattered. They were the ones talking. She had heard bits of conversations throughout the day, whispers that made her stomach twist. Did you see that? The Mafia boss, standing with her like she was someone important. What was that about? She's just a maid, right? I heard they're close, but this is something else. They were all speculating. And the worst part was, she couldn't escape it. She couldn't hide from it. She had never been one to draw attention to herself, but now, it seemed impossible to avoid. Sophia had never been the center of attention in her life. Her days had always been filled with cleaning, serving, staying out of the way. But last night, everything had changed. The rumor was spreading like wildfire, and it wasn't just about her. It was about Vincent too. The whispers turned into questions. People wanted to know why he had stood with her, why he had chosen to support her in front of the entire room. They knew him as the Mafia boss, the man with the power to make or break anyone. But they didn't know this side of him, the side that had seen her, a lowly maid, as someone worth standing up for. What did that mean? What did it mean for her? For Vincent? She didn't know, but the questions were starting to pile up. It wasn't just the guests at the gala who were talking. She had heard rumors floating around the staff, whispers about how the Mafia boss had been so kind to her. Kindness? Was that what it was? She didn't know. All she knew was that nothing about last night had felt normal. Nothing about standing with Vincent Romano, of all people, had felt normal. She had never imagined that one small moment could set everything into motion. But it had. Sophia's life was no longer what it had been the day before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. And that terrified her. As the day wore on, the weight of the situation only grew heavier. She felt the eyes of the other staff members on her, the gaze of the guests following her every movement. She tried to go about her duties as usual, but it was impossible. Her mind was too consumed with the questions, the fear, the uncertainty. What did Vincent think of her? Had he acted out of kindness, or had there been something more to it? Was he truly different from the others, or was this all part of his game? And why, after all these years of being invisible, had he chosen her? There were too many questions and no answers. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her. It was as if he saw her for the first time, as if he had noticed her, really noticed her, in a way no one ever had. But in the back of her mind, there was a nagging thought. She knew what kind of world Vincent lived in. She knew the kind of person he was. He wasn't just a man. He was a Mafia boss, and people like him didn't do anything without a reason. People like him didn't act out of kindness without expecting something in return. And that's what scared her the most. Because no matter how kind Vincent had been in that moment, she knew there was always a price to pay. There always was. As she continued with her duties, a sense of dread settled over her. The moment with Vincent had shifted something inside her, but it had also opened a door to a world she wasn't sure she wanted to be part of. The rumors were just the beginning. She could feel it. There was more to come, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. I never thought I would be in this position. Sophia Davis moved through the mansion as if in a dream, still shaken from the events of the night before. The grand estate, with its marble floors and gold-trimmed windows, seemed almost alien to her now. She had always been invisible here, just another pair of hands moving through the background. But the moment Vincent Romano had stood by her, everything had changed. The rumors had spread, and the eyes that followed her felt more intense than ever. She could sense the whispers in the air, the judgment in every glance. But what scared her more was the silence that followed Vincent's action. People were talking, but no one dared speak to her directly. The tension in the house was thick. She tried to focus on her work, dusting off antique furniture, making sure the floors were spotless, but her mind kept returning to that moment with Vincent. What had made him stand up for her like that? What was it about her that had caught his attention? And more importantly, what did it mean for her? The feeling of his presence lingered in the air, like a heavy perfume. His eyes, cold and calculating, had softened for a moment, and she had felt, for the first time, as though she was seen as a person, not just a servant. It wasn't a kindness that she was used to. It was something more, something dangerous. She could feel the uncertainty building within her, the creeping sense of something she wasn't prepared for. And then, as if on cue, the phone in the back office rang. Sophia hesitated, knowing she had no choice but to answer it. She picked up the receiver, her hands shaking slightly. Hello. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. Sophia Davis? The tone was businesslike, polite, but there was an edge to it. This is Dominic Castellano's office. We need you to come to the main office for a meeting with Mr. Castellano. Now, Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the name before. Dominic Castellano was a powerful man, second only to Vincent in the Mafia world. But she had never interacted with him directly. The idea of facing him filled her with unease, but she knew she couldn't refuse. She put down the receiver, feeling a cold wave of fear rush over her. Her body moved on autopilot as she changed out of her uniform, putting on a simple dress that she hoped would be appropriate. As she walked through the mansion's corridors, every step felt heavier than the last. She could feel the eyes of the other staff members on her, watching her every move. The weight of their gaze was suffocating. It was as if they knew something she didn't. The mansion, once a place where she moved unnoticed, now felt like a trap. When she arrived at the office, she was greeted by two men in suits who stood with their arms crossed, blocking the door. "Mr. Castellano is expecting you," one of them said, his voice gruff. Sophia nodded, her throat dry. She stepped past them and into the office, where Dominic Castellano stood by the window, looking out at the city below. His back was to her, but she could feel his presence in the room like a physical force. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features that made him look like someone who could control the world with a single glance. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. There was something about his gaze, cold, intense, and unreadable. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, as if assessing her. "You're the maid, Sophia Davis," he said, his voice low and steady. She nodded, unsure of what to say. "You're the one who caught the attention of my brother, Vincent," he continued. His words were more of a statement than a question, and Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't know why he did what he did," she replied softly. "It wasn't my choice." Dominic's expression didn't change. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said slowly, stepping closer. "Vincent doesn't do anything without a reason, and neither do I." Sophia's heart raced. She could feel the weight of his words, the implication that her life had just become tangled with something much larger than she had ever imagined. She had always been invisible to the powerful men in this house, but now she was being pulled into their world, whether she wanted to be or not. Dominic walked around her, his eyes never leaving hers. He seemed to be studying her, weighing her like a piece of property. "You're smart," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You must know the kind of game Vincent and I play, and I'm sure you can guess what happens to people who get in our way." Sophia swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just want to do my job." Dominic stopped in front of her, his face inches from hers. For a moment, he said nothing, just stared into her eyes, and Sophia could feel the power emanating from him. Then, without warning, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, but one that held an unsettling promise. "You're not going anywhere, Sophia," he said softly. "Not until I say so." I could barely move, my body frozen as Dominic Castellano's words echoed in my mind. "You're not going anywhere, Sophia. Not until I say so." His voice, smooth and calm, sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard about men like him, the mafia bosses who ruled their empires with an iron fist, who played games with people's lives. But this was different. This wasn't just about power or control. It was personal. I had always been invisible in this world, but now, in a strange twist of fate, I was caught in the web of these powerful men. Dominic's eyes never left mine, and I could feel the weight of his gaze as if he were peeling back the layers of my very soul. I had no idea what he wanted from me, but I knew it wasn't going to be something simple. "I don't want any trouble," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "I just want to do my job." Dominic took a slow step back, his expression unreadable. "Trouble," he said softly. "You're already in trouble, Sophia. You've caught the attention of people who don't let go easily." His words hung in the air, thick with implication. I didn't know what he meant by that, but the fear inside me grew. He had mentioned his brother, Vincent, the man who had unexpectedly stood by me in front of everyone. What did that have to do with all this? Was I caught in some sort of game between the two of them? Was Vincent's gesture a mistake, or had it been intentional? "I'm not here to make threats, Sophia," Dominic continued, his voice shifting, becoming more measured. "I'm here to make sure you understand something. This isn't a world where you can just walk away. Once you're in for good. And you have a choice to make." My heart pounded in my chest. What choice was he talking about? "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Dominic leaned in slightly, his presence overwhelming. "I want you to keep your eyes open," he said quietly. "There's more at play here than you realize. You've been in this world for far too long to still be naive." I didn't know how to respond. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew I couldn't walk away from this conversation. Not now. I had already made the mistake of standing up in front of the room with Vincent, and now everything was spinning out of control. "You think Vincent is different, don't you?" Dominic's voice cut through my thoughts, and I looked up to see a strange glint in his eyes. You think he's the one who's going to protect you from all this. But let me tell you something. Vincent is just as dangerous as I am. He just hides it better. The words stung, but I couldn't argue. I had seen a side of Vincent that no one else had. A side that had made me believe, for just a moment, that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. But now, hearing Dominic's words, I wasn't so sure. You'll see, Dominic said, straightening up. You'll see what happens next. And you'll have to make a decision. You can either stay here, stay in this world with us, or you can walk away. But walking away isn't as easy as it sounds. Once you're in, there's no going back. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of his words sinking in. I had no choice. The game had already started, and I was a pawn in it. Dominic gave me one last look, and without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving me standing there, stunned and confused. I didn't know what was going to happen next. All I knew was that my life had changed forever. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I knew deep down that I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything that had already happened. I was in this world now, and there was no turning back. I spent the next few days in a state of constant unease. Every time I walked through the mansion, I could feel eyes on me. Staff members, guests, everyone seemed to be watching, waiting. It was as if the whole world had shifted around me, and I was caught in the middle of something far beyond my control. The tension in the air was thick. I could feel it in the way people whispered when I passed, the way they glanced at me as if I were a puzzle they were trying to solve. And then there was Dominic's words, echoing in my mind. Once you're in, there's no going back. I had no idea what I was in for. I had never imagined my life would take a turn like this. All I had wanted was to do my job, to stay out of the way, but now I was entangled in something I couldn't even begin to understand. I had seen Vincent, the Mafia boss, act differently toward me, but Dominic was different. His words were cold, calculating, as if he had already decided my fate. I didn't know if he was trying to scare me, or if he was just telling me the truth. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a deal with the devil. That night, after everything had calmed down, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. What did Vincent really want from me? What did Dominic mean by his cryptic words? There was so much I didn't know, so many questions, but no one to answer them. The silence of the mansion felt suffocating, and I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever feel normal again. The next morning, I was summoned to the dining room. As I entered, I saw Vincent sitting at the head of the table, his dark eyes fixed on a pile of papers in front of him. He didn't look up as I approached, and for a moment, I thought he hadn't noticed me. But then, without looking up, he spoke. "You've been avoiding me." The words startled me, and I quickly lowered my head. "I wasn't avoiding you, sir," I said quietly. I don't know what to say." Vincent's gaze shifted, and for the first time, I saw a hint of something softer in his eyes. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But you need to understand something. You're part of this now. You're part of my world. Whether you like it or not." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. I had never asked for any of this. I had never wanted to be part of this dangerous world, but here I was, caught in its grip. "I don't want to be a part of it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked up at me then, his expression unreadable. "You don't have a choice," he replied. "Once you're in, there's no getting out." I felt a shiver run down my spine as his words hit me with full force. There it was again, the same message Dominic had given me. There was no escape. I had been pulled into their world, and now, there was no turning back. But why? I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could stop it. Why me? Vincent's gaze softened, and for a moment, I saw something resembling sympathy in his eyes. "Because you matter," he said simply, "and because I believe you're stronger than you think." I didn't understand. I didn't know what he saw in me, but I couldn't deny the effect his words had on me. For the first time since this whole mess had started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely powerless. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," I said, the doubt creeping into my voice. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about standing up when you don't have a choice. And you don't have a choice anymore, Sophia. You're in this with me. With us." His words settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating yet strangely comforting. I didn't know if I was ready for this world, for whatever it was that Vincent and Dominic had planned, but I knew I had no choice. As much as I wanted to walk away, as much as I wanted to pretend none of this was happening, I was already in too deep, and I wasn't sure if I could survive it. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but the weight of Vincent's words followed me everywhere I went. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't escape him. I had been pulled into a world of shadows, and there was no telling where it would lead. But one thing was certain. I was no longer invisible. I had been seen, and that terrified me. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process everything Vincent had said. I couldn't shake the weight of his words, and each time I moved through the mansion, I felt as though the walls were closing in on me. His voice, calm and steady, echoed in my mind. You're part of this. Now, whether you like it or not. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was caught in the tangled web of Mafia politics, and there was no getting out. Every glance, every whispered conversation felt like it was directed at me. I had never been the center of attention before, and now I felt like I was the focal point of a storm I couldn't escape. It was like I had stepped into a world I didn't belong to, where every move I made had consequences. It wasn't just about Vincent anymore. It was about Dominic, too. The tension between them, the way they both seemed to hold so much power, was something I could feel every time I stepped into a room with either of them. I wasn't sure who to trust, and I certainly wasn't sure where I fit in all of this. The days passed, but the unease didn't fade. I kept busy, doing my work and trying to ignore the whispers that followed me wherever I went. But the questions were always there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. What did Vincent see in me? What did Dominic want? I had been just a maid, someone who blended into the background, but now I was suddenly thrust into a world of secrets, power plays, and dangerous alliances. I spent a lot of time alone, trying to make sense of my new reality. My old life seemed so distant, so far removed from the mansion's polished walls and the world that Vincent and Dominic inhabited. I missed the simplicity of it, the quiet life I had before I had caught their attention. But I knew it wasn't as simple as that anymore. As much as I longed for normalcy, I had been pulled into something much bigger. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, I was asked to come to Vincent's study. I was nervous, my heart racing as I made my way through the familiar halls. The last time I had been in his presence, it had left me shaken, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him again. But I had no choice. When I arrived, Vincent was sitting behind his large desk, his eyes focused on a set of papers in front of him. The room was dimly lit, with the faint smell of cigar smoke hanging in the air. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to say or do. I had never been in a situation like this before. Sit down, Sophia, he said without looking up. His voice was calm, but there was an authority in it that made me obey without hesitation. I sat down across from him, trying to steady my breath. Vincent finally looked up, his gaze intense and unrelenting. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About not wanting to be a part of this world. I understand that, but I need you to understand something. His tone was serious, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. You're already part of it. Whether you like it or not, you're involved now. The sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for you. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. I never asked for any of this, I said quietly. I just wanted to do my job, to stay out of the way. Vincent's expression softened, just slightly, but the edge was still there. That's the thing, Sophia, he said. You never asked for it. But you've been pulled into this world, and there's no turning back. You can't just walk away. People like you and me, we don't have that luxury. Once you're in for good. His words settled heavily in the air, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. I had never felt more trapped in my life. I wasn't sure what Vincent wanted from me, but it was clear that he saw me as a pawn in his game, a small part of a much larger plan. I didn't know what that plan was, but I could feel the storm brewing around me. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. I want you to understand that you're under my protection now, he said slowly. But that protection comes at a price. You'll have to play the game, Sophia. There's no other way. I felt a surge of frustration. I don't want to play any game, I said, my voice shaking. I don't belong here. I don't want to be part of this. Vincent's gaze hardened. You don't have a choice. No one does. The room fell silent for a moment, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that there was a way out. that I could go back to my old life. But now, it was clear that wasn't an option. I was in this world, whether I wanted to be or not. Vincent stood up and walked around his desk, coming to stand in front of me. For a moment, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I didn't bring you here to scare you, Sophia," he said quietly. "I brought you here because you need to understand that you're not alone in this. We're in this together." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I wasn't part of his world, that I didn't belong here. But I couldn't, because in that moment, I realized he was right. I was already in this world, and there was no going back. I woke up the next morning with a sense of heaviness pressing down on me. The events of the night before had not been a nightmare. They were my reality now. Vincent's words, his gaze, everything he had said, it was all sinking in, and the more I thought about it, the harder it became to breathe. I had been pulled into a world I didn't understand, and now there was no way out. The mansion seemed eerily quiet as I moved through it. The halls that once felt so familiar now feeling foreign, filled with tension. I could still feel the weight of Dominic's words from the other day, echoing in my mind. Once you're in for good. That was the truth. There was no turning back. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was part of their world. It didn't matter if I wanted to be or not. I had been marked, and the consequences were unfolding before my eyes. As I walked through the halls, I tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible to ignore the eyes that followed me. The staff was more reserved than usual, almost as if they knew something I didn't. The guests, too, seemed to be watching me closely, their whispers growing louder with each passing moment. The rumors were spreading like wildfire, and I was caught right in the middle of it. But it wasn't just the guests and staff who were on my mind. I kept thinking about Vincent. What did he want from me? Why had he stood up for me that night? Why had he said those things? His words kept replaying in my head, and I couldn't make sense of them. "You're part of this now." What did he mean by that? Was he trying to protect me, or was this just another game to him? I had never been good at reading people, especially not people like Vincent. But there was something about him, something that both terrified and intrigued me. I wasn't sure what his motives were, but I knew one thing for certain. He was dangerous. Not just in the way people feared him, but in the way he could change everything with a single decision. I could feel my mind racing, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had work to do. The day passed slowly, each moment dragging on as I moved from one task to the next. I found myself lingering in the background, staying out of the way as much as possible. The tension in the air was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone knew something I didn't. By the time the evening came, I was exhausted. I had barely spoken to anyone all day, and I was grateful for the silence. That was, until I was called to Vincent's study again. This time, there was no hesitation. I had learned that when Vincent called for you, you didn't refuse. As I walked into his study, I found him standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The same feeling of unease washed over me as I stood there, waiting for him to speak. It was like I was trapped in his world, unable to escape, and unable to fully understand it. Finally, he turned to face me. "Sophia," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I've been thinking about everything. About you, and about the situation you're in." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but I could feel the tension building between us. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I told you before," he said. "You're in this world now, and you need to understand that there's no going back. You've been marked, and people are watching you. People are talking." His words hit me hard, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I had always been invisible, always been just a background figure in this world, but now, I was the center of attention. And not in a good way. "I don't know how to do this," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know how to be a part of this world. I don't belong here." Vincent took a step closer to me, his expression softening just slightly. "No one belongs here," he said. "But we all have to find our place. And for better or worse, this is yours now, whether you want it or not." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him that I wanted nothing to do with this world, but another part of me knew that wasn't possible. I was already in it, and the more I fought it, the harder it would be to escape. "You don't have to like it," Vincent continued, "but you do have to accept it. And the sooner you do, the better." I felt like I was drowning in his words, each one pulling me deeper into this world I didn't want to be a part of. But I knew he was right. There was no escaping. I had already crossed the line. and there was no turning back. As I stood there in the study, Vincent's words swirling in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a permanent turn. I had been pulled into something I didn't understand, and now, it seemed like there was no way out. All I could do was play along and hope that somehow, I would find a way to survive it. I spent the next few days in a constant state of confusion, trying to process everything that had happened. Every moment felt like I was walking through a fog, my mind unable to catch up with the reality that had been thrust upon me. I couldn't ignore the weight of Vincent's words, the way he had looked at me when he told me that there was no going back. I wasn't sure what kind of game he was playing, but I knew it wasn't something I could easily escape. The mansion felt different now. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive. I was constantly aware of the eyes on me, the unspoken tension in the air. The other staff members seemed to avoid looking at me, and the guests, they were talking. I could hear snippets of their conversations, their curiosity and judgment hanging in the air like a cloud I couldn't escape. Did you see that? The Mafia boss, standing with her. I can't believe Vincent did that. What does it mean? She's just a maid, right? Why would he? Their voices faded into the background, but the words stuck with me. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was part of something much bigger, something I didn't understand. And that terrified me. That evening, I was summoned to the main dining room. I wasn't sure what to expect. The days had been filled with tension, but I hadn't had a direct conversation with Vincent since the last one in his study. I walked through the halls, each step heavy, as though the weight of what had happened was pulling me down. When I arrived, Vincent was already sitting at the head of the table, his presence as imposing as ever. There were a few other people in the room, men in suits who looked like they belonged to his world, people I had never met before. They didn't acknowledge me as I entered, their eyes fixed on Vincent. He didn't look at me immediately, but I could feel his gaze as he spoke to the men around him, discussing something I couldn't quite make out. It wasn't until the room fell into a brief silence that Vincent looked up at me. His eyes were as sharp as ever, but this time, there was something else, something softer in them. Sit down, he said, his voice steady. I didn't hesitate. I sat across from him, trying to steady my breath. The tension in the room was palpable, but Vincent's presence had a strange way of calming it, like the eye of a storm. I've been thinking about you, Sophia, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. I felt my heart skip a beat. His gaze was unwavering, and I could feel the weight of his words. You're a part of this now, whether you like it or not. You've been marked. The words hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. I never asked for any of this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I just want to do my job. I never wanted to be part of this world. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table. I know, he said, his tone softening for a moment. But this world doesn't care about what you want. It only cares about what you can give it. And now, you're a part of it. You don't get to choose. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I didn't belong here, that I had no place in this world of power and danger. But I couldn't. The truth was that I didn't have a choice anymore. I had been pulled into something bigger than myself, and there was no way out. The men in the room seemed to be listening intently, but they didn't speak. I wasn't sure if they were waiting for Vincent to say something more, or if they were just as curious about me as I was about them. You've been under my protection since the moment you stepped into this world, Vincent continued, his eyes never leaving mine. But that protection comes with a cost. You'll have to follow the rules. And if you don't, he let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but I had a sinking feeling that I didn't want to find out. I didn't know what the cost would be, but I knew it wouldn't be something simple. The price of being part of Vincent's world wasn't something I could easily pay. I don't want to be a burden, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just want to do my job, like I always have. Vincent studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're not a burden, Sophia, he said quietly. You're an asset. And in this world, assets are valuable. I didn't know what to make of that. Was he telling me that I had a place here? Or was he just trying to manipulate me, to make me feel like I had no choice but to stay in this dangerous world? The conversation ended shortly after that, and I was dismissed. As I left the room, I couldn't help but feel like I had just taken another step deeper into something I couldn't escape. The air felt thick with uncertainty, and the fear I had been carrying for days only grew heavier. I wasn't sure what Vincent wanted from me, but I knew one thing. I was in his world now. and there was no turning back. I spent the following days caught in a whirlwind of confusion and anxiety. Each day felt like a blur, the moments dragging on, and I found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything. The mansion, once a familiar place, now felt foreign, like a cage I couldn't escape. It wasn't just the silence that had changed, it was the weight of the situation, the knowledge that I had been pulled into something much bigger than myself. Vincent's words, Dominic's cold presence, the rumors, they were all closing in on me. I could feel the eyes of the other staff members, their gaze full of curiosity and judgment. But it wasn't just the staff. It was the guests, the ones who came and went, always with eyes full of questions. The whispers were growing louder. What does she mean to Vincent? Is she part of this world now? I had always been the one who blended into the background, never drawing attention to myself. But now, it felt like the world was watching. I wanted to go back to being invisible, to retreat into the safety of my old life, but I knew that was impossible. I was already too far in. Each time I passed through the grand halls, I could feel the eyes on me, judging me, questioning me. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something darker in the air, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I had become part of this world, whether I wanted to or not. The thought weighed heavily on me. After Vincent had told me that there was no turning back, I tried to ignore the feeling that everything was out of my control. But it was hard to ignore the feeling of being trapped, of being caught in a game I didn't understand. I had tried to focus on my work, to keep my head down and stay out of the way, but the anxiety was overwhelming. Each day felt like it brought something new, something I couldn't prepare for. A few days later, I found myself summoned to Vincent's study again. This time, there was no hesitation. I had learned that when Vincent called for you, you went. As I entered the study, I found him sitting at his desk, papers spread out before him, his expression serious and focused. He didn't look up at first, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. I stood there, unsure of what to say or do, but then he finally spoke. "Sit down, Sophia." His voice was firm, but not unkind. I did as I was told, taking a seat across from him. His eyes never left the papers in front of him, but I could feel the weight of his attention on me. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, his voice low and steady. "About wanting to walk away from all of this." I swallowed hard. I had hoped he might forget about that conversation, but it seemed he hadn't. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," I said quietly. I didn't ask for any of this. I never wanted to be part of this world." Vincent looked up then, his gaze steady, as if he were measuring me. "You've already crossed that line, Sophia," he said. "And once you cross it, there's no going back." I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. I knew this. I had known it since that first moment when he stood up for me in front of the guests. I had been pulled into this world, whether I wanted to be or not. "But you need to understand something," Vincent continued. "I didn't bring you here to destroy your life. You have something I need. You have something that can help me." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what he meant. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're smart, Sophia," he said, his tone almost admiring. "You see things that others don't. You have a sharp mind, and that's why you're here." My heart pounded in my chest. "You need me for something?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Vincent nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice calm but purposeful. "You're part of a bigger plan now. Whether you like it or not, you're involved. And I need your help to make sure that everything goes the way it should." I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't understand what kind of plan he was talking about, but I knew that I was in deep now. I couldn't escape it. "I don't know how I can help," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm just a maid. I'm nothing special." Vincent's gaze softened, just slightly. "That's where you're wrong, Sophia. You're not just a maid. You're much more than that. And you're going to have to trust me." Trust. The word echoed in my mind, and I realized just how little trust one had left. I didn't know what Vincent wanted from me, but I could see the path ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. There was no way to walk away from this. No way to unmake the decision I had already made. I had been caught in this world, and now I was bound to it. "I don't know if I can trust you," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust anyone in this world." Vincent was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped in front of me, looking down at me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to trust me, Sophia," he said softly. But you do have to trust that I will keep you safe. In this world, that's all you need. I didn't know if I believed him, but I knew one thing for sure. I had no other choice. I was in this now, and I was going to have to live with the consequences. I spent the next few days lost in my thoughts, unable to shake off the lingering weight of Vincent's words. He had told me that I had no choice, that I was part of this world now. I didn't want to accept it, but deep down, I knew he was right. There was no going back. The mansion felt even more suffocating as the days passed, each moment weighed down by the unspoken tension that seemed to surround me. I tried to focus on my work, to keep my head down and remain as invisible as I had been before, but it was impossible. Every glance from the other staff members felt like a reminder that I was no longer just a maid. The rumors were relentless. I could hear their whispers, the way they exchanged glances when I passed by, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. I couldn't escape the reality of my situation. I wasn't just part of the household anymore. I was part of something much bigger, something I didn't fully understand. One afternoon, as I was finishing up my duties, I was summoned to Vincent's study again. I had learned that when Vincent called, you went. No questions asked. I walked through the grand halls, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to expect this time. As I entered the study, Vincent was sitting at his desk, his back to me as he looked over some papers. The moment I entered, he turned his head slightly, acknowledging my presence. "Sit down, Sophia," he said, his tone calm and measured. I hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from him. His gaze was focused, but I could sense the weight of his attention. There was something in his eyes that made me feel both exposed and strangely safe at the same time. "I've been thinking," Vincent began, his voice low and steady, "about how things have changed for you. How your life has shifted since you stepped into this world." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't know what to say. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. "You've been marked, Sophia," he continued. "And you need to understand what that means. It's not just about being part of my world. It's about knowing that once you're here, there's no turning back. You're in this whether you like it or not." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known this, of course, but hearing him say it out loud made it all the more real. I was in it. There was no escaping now. "I don't want to be part of this," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never asked for any of this." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied me. "I know you didn't," he said, his tone softening just a little. "But sometimes, life doesn't give us the choices we want. It gives us the choices we need to make. And you've made yours." I felt a rush of frustration. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be part of the chaos and danger that seemed to swirl around Vincent and his world. But as much as I hated it, I knew he was right. I had already made my choice the moment I stepped into this world. And now I was part of it, for better or worse. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Vincent's gaze softened slightly, but the intensity in his eyes never wavered. "Now, you follow the rules," he said simply. "You do what's required of you. And you stay out of trouble." His words were clear, but I could sense there was more he wasn't saying. There was always more with Vincent. "And if I don't?" I asked, unable to stop myself. Vincent's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Then you'll find out just how far the consequences go," he replied. I didn't need to ask him to elaborate. I understood what he meant. In this world, there were no second chances. The consequences of stepping out of line were far too high. "I don't want to be a burden," I said quietly. "I just want to do my job and stay out of the way." Vincent's expression softened slightly, but there was still a sense of calculation in his eyes. "You're not a burden, Sophia," he said, his voice steady. "But you need to understand that you're part of this world now. You're part of the family. And when you're part of the family, you have responsibilities. You have obligations." The weight of his words settled on my chest, and for the first time, I realized just how deep I had gotten into this world. I wasn't just someone who was passing through. I was entangled in something far bigger, and there was no way to get out of it. Vincent's gaze softened for a moment, and I could see the faintest hint of something like understanding in his eyes. "I know this is a lot for you," he said quietly, "but you'll get used to it. In time." I wasn't sure if that was a promise or a warning, but either way, it didn't matter. The truth was, I didn't have a choice. I was in this, and I had to find a way to survive. As I left the study, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my new reality pressing down on me. The mansion, the people, the dangerous world I had been dragged into. They were all a part of my life now. There was no turning back, no way to undo what had been done. I had been marked, and now I had to live with the consequences. I tried to convince myself that it was just another day, that things would eventually go back to normal, but I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of my situation was inescapable. The walls of the mansion, once comforting in their familiarity, now felt like they were closing in on me. Vincent's words, Dominic's presence, the constant whispers, it was all becoming too much. I had no choice but to accept it, but acceptance didn't make it easier. I was now part of their world, tied to it in a way I couldn't undo. The mansion itself felt different, darker, somehow. The echoes of my own thoughts were loud, and no matter how much I tried to stay focused on my tasks, the unease never left me. Every step I took seemed to lead me further into a web I couldn't untangle. The staff was still watchful, but now there was a distance between us, as though they knew I had crossed a threshold and couldn't go back. Even the guests, the ones who used to ignore me, now treated me like I was someone they needed to figure out. They didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know who I was. The thought was overwhelming. One evening, as I cleaned the dining room, I heard footsteps approaching. It was late, and I hadn't expected anyone to be around. I turned to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his presence as commanding as ever. My heart skipped a beat. "Sophia," he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it. "I need you to come with me." I didn't question him. I followed him through the mansion, my thoughts racing. We reached a room I hadn't seen before, tucked away at the back of the house. Vincent opened the door and stepped inside, motioning for me to follow. The room was smaller than the others, with a single lamp casting a soft glow over a desk covered in papers. He closed the door behind us, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "Sit down," Vincent said, his voice firm. I took a seat at the desk, unsure of what to expect. He sat down across from me, his gaze never leaving mine. There was something different about him tonight. His usual calm demeanor was tinged with a hint of something more serious. "I've been thinking about what's been happening," he began, his voice steady. "About you, and about how this has all unfolded." My heart was still racing. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever he was about to say. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "I need your trust," he said, his words simple, but they carried weight. "And I need you to understand that there are things happening in this world that you don't see yet. Things that, if you're not careful, could destroy everything. I'm trying to protect you, Sophia, but you need to understand the rules." I didn't know what he meant. I had heard whispers about things in the Mafia world, the power struggles, the deals, the dangerous alliances, but I never imagined I would be directly involved in them. "I don't know if I can trust anyone," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. Vincent's expression softened for just a moment, but then his gaze hardened again. "I understand why you feel that way," he said, his tone almost gentle. "But you have to trust me. You're here now, and that means you have to play by the rules. The consequences of not doing so are severe." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you expect from me?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "I don't know how to be a part of this world." Vincent leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto mine. "You don't have to know everything right now," he said, "but you need to stay focused. There's a lot at stake, and you're more involved in this than you realize. Your choices matter." I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me. Everything in me screamed that I wanted to run, to escape this world and return to the life I once knew, but deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. I was in this now. "I just want to survive," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's gaze softened, but only for a second. "Survival is more than just staying out of trouble, Sophia. It's about learning how to navigate this world, how to protect yourself when the time comes." I didn't understand what he meant, but I could feel the truth in his words. I had been thrust into a world of shadows, a world where every decision could have dire consequences. "I'm trying to keep you safe," Vincent said, his voice steady. "But you need to start thinking like someone who belongs in this world. You need to learn how to make your own decisions. Trust me, the sooner you do, the better." I didn't know if I could trust him, but in that moment, I realized that I didn't have much of a choice. I was part of this world now, and whether I liked it or not, I had to learn how to survive in it. The silence in the room grew thick, and I knew that this conversation was just the beginning. Vincent had made it clear that there was no turning back, and the truth was, there was no way out. I was caught in a world of power, danger, and deceit, and I had to figure out how to navigate it if I wanted to make it out alive. I spent the following days in a daze, each one blurring into the next. I tried to keep my head down and focus on my work, but the weight of my new reality was always there, pressing down on me. Vincent's words, the promise of protection, and the cold truth that I was now part of his world. No matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. The mansion felt colder than usual, and I found myself constantly aware of the eyes that followed me. The staff, though polite, had grown distant, and the guests seemed to watch me with a curiosity that made me uncomfortable. I wasn't sure what they saw when they looked at me, but it didn't matter. I wasn't the same person I used to be. One afternoon, I was summoned to Vincent's study once again. My heart began to race at the thought of what he wanted this time. I had no idea what his plans were, but I knew one thing for sure. He was never just idle. When I arrived, he was sitting at his desk, as usual, but this time, there was a stack of files in front of him. He glanced up as I entered, his gaze sharp as always. "Come in, Sophia," he said, his voice steady and commanding. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, trying to keep my composure. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair in front of his desk. I did as instructed, my mind racing with questions. "You've been doing well," he said after a moment of silence. I wasn't sure if he meant it or if he was just being polite, but I didn't say anything. I had been working as hard as I could, but I still didn't feel like I belonged in this world. "But I need you to understand something," Vincent continued, his tone growing more serious. "You're not just here to do menial work, Sophia. I brought you here because I believe you have potential. You have skills that can be useful to me." His words struck me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had always thought of myself as just a maid, someone who worked in the background, never noticed, never acknowledged. But now, Vincent was telling me I had potential, skills I didn't even know I had. "What do you mean?" I asked, unable to hide the confusion in my voice. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I've seen the way you think, the way you handle situations. You're sharp, resourceful. You've adapted to this world faster than I expected, and that's not something I take lightly." I didn't know what to say. I had never thought of myself as particularly special. I just did what I had to do to survive. "I don't know what you're asking of me," I said quietly. Vincent's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't going to let this go. "I'm asking you to be more than just a maid, Sophia. I'm asking you to be my eyes, my ears. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands the stakes of this world. I need someone who can handle the things that I don't have time for." His words hung in the air, and I felt my stomach tighten. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't asked to be involved in any of this. And yet, here I was, being pulled deeper into a world I didn't understand. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why not someone else?" Vincent looked at me for a long moment, his gaze piercing, as if he were trying to read my soul. "Because you're the only one who's shown any real promise," he said simply. "You're the only one who hasn't let fear hold you back." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or if he was just stating a fact, but either way, it didn't make me feel any better. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear that was creeping in. "I want you to keep an eye on things," Vincent said, his voice low. "There are people in this world who don't want to see me succeed. People who want to undermine everything I've built. I need you to be aware of them, to gather information. I need you to be my eyes when I can't be there." The gravity of his words sank in, and for the first time, I realized just how much danger I was in. I had thought that just doing my job would be enough to stay out of trouble, but I was wrong. Vincent wasn't just asking me to do more. He was pulling me into the heart of his world. "And if I refuse?" I asked before I could stop myself. Vincent's eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something dangerous in them. "Refuse," he said softly, "and you won't just be walking away from me. You'll be walking away from everything. From the protection I'm offering you. From everything you've come to rely on." His words were a reminder of just how powerful he was, and how powerless I was in this world. I had no choice. I was already in this too deep, and the thought of walking away was terrifying. "I'll do it," I said, the words escaping me before I had a chance to think them through. "Good," Vincent said, his voice steady once again. "I knew you would. You're smarter than you give yourself credit." 4. I didn't feel smart. I didn't feel brave. I felt trapped. But I knew that I had no choice now. I had to play this game if I wanted to survive. Vincent stood up from his desk, his gaze fixed on me. "This is your new reality, Sophia," he said. "And it's not going to be easy. But you'll learn how to navigate it. You'll learn how to survive." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed him. The world I had stepped into was dangerous, unpredictable, and now I was a part of it. There was no going back.